Hello and welcome to Manger's Study. I am your host, CJ, and this is episode 6 on Project 2025. As I am recording this is the 26th of July, 2024, and there are 101 days until midnight on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024, Election Day. We are now on page 87, or 120 of the PDF, Section 2, Chapter 2, the Common Defense. The Department of Defense, Project 2025 tells us, is a troubled institution emphasizing politics over readiness. The DoD should emphasize military matters, not matters such as, quote, climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and other polarizing policies that weaken our armed forces and discourage our nation's finest men and women from enlisting, unquote. China is, of course, the biggest threat to America. It is the U.S.'s job, Project 2025 says, to protect Taiwan and other Asian countries from expansionist China. But we have to do that to the extent that the American people would be willing to do it. Now, from my own perspective, like I've said before, China isn't a terribly big threat. With their self-inflicted demographic problems, their exorbitant public spending, and a plethora of other problems, all we have to do to beat China is to wait for them to fall. The only way we can lose is if we engage in a war with them, because nobody will really be the winners there, or if we try to outspend them, which will just lead to the U.S.'s failure. Now, the federal bureaucracy is quite good at obfuscating costs, so I have no doubt that the American people will remain either in the dark about any spending going to defend against China, or they will just remain unconcerned about it. Now, there is a little tiny bright spot in Project 2025 here. Congress should be in charge of declaring war, oddly enough, or other such actions, and the executive branch should, well, execute any actions that Congress deems necessary. I think that's nice. You just don't want the executive going off willy-nilly doing whatever it is that they want. Yeah, as many problems that the Department of Defense has, the State Department has even worse problems. DoD has leftism imposed from outside, whereas the State Department, the call is coming from inside the house. The State Department is staffed with a left-wing workforce who will oppose any right-wing president's agenda. And they believe themselves to be more independent than what the Constitution says they should be. All right, so we have more calls for more reforms and even the elimination of the Department of Homeland Security. I can get behind that. Wait, no, they don't want to get rid of it. They just want to replace it and send some things back to other departments and then replace it with a border and immigration cabinet agency, which is, again, something that should be dealt with by an already existing department, something that predated the Department of Homeland Security could surely take care of that. No, they need Department of Homeland Security, and let's just narrow that down to just being border and immigration control. Now, what else? Project 2025 tells us that the intelligence community needs some work, as does USAID. Enough of the broad strokes, though. Let's get into it. Looking exactly what Project 2025 wants to do with the Department of Defense. We are on section something 4. It's going to be on page 91 or page 124 of the PDF. The Constitution says a thing or two about the war and armies and navies and stuff, oddly enough. Project 2025 does inform us that the DoD is a deeply troubled institution. Misuse, lack of accountability in senior officers, wasteful spending, shifting policies, bad execution, DEI policies, and vaccine mandates have all left the DoD in its troubled state. There's some more Biden bad stuff in here, but fair enough. Also, just so you know, drugs kill people, like fentanyl. It kills people. And that is a military problem. See, war. War never changes. Except for, of course, all the ways that it does change. And it has changed a lot in the past few years. In my lifetime, it has changed a lot. The DoD, being incredibly big and incredibly bureaucratic, doesn't want to change. So strong leadership must make it change. I do, at least partially, agree here with this part of Project 2025. War has changed, and the technology that we would use to fight war with has changed. The technology used by our enemies has changed, and the bureaucratic Department of Defense does not change nearly fast enough with the times. I was in the Navy in the early 2000s, well, in the 2000s, in the aughts. And the newest technology that we had for our weapons were at least a decade out of date. Some weapon systems got a bit more love than others, but the ones that are behind the time, that are really behind the times, well, one weapon system was still using like tape-to-tape data recording technology in the year of our Lord 2005. In recent times, after I have gotten out, we have seen things, there's just boondoggle after boondoggle after boondoggle. There's the entire F-35 program. Don't get me started. You can find other things, other places that will tell you how horrible that has been. There has been the LCS ships, the littoral combat ships. No, they're the little crappy ships. That is what their nickname is. And these have come at great expense with nothing of value to show for it. Lucky for us, Project 2025 is going to list a few priorities for the Department of Defense. Priority number 1 is to reestablish a culture of command accountability, non-politicization, and a war-fighting focus. Number 2, transform our armed forces for maximum effectiveness in an area of great power competition. Number 3, provide necessary support to Department of Homeland Security border protection operations. Border protection is a national security issue that requires sustained attention and effort by all elements of the executive branch. Priority number 4, demand financial transparency and accountability. All right, let's see how they're going to break these. Oh, there's China. Crap. Quote, by far, the most significant danger to American security, freedoms, and prosperity is China. Unquote. All right, I've talked about this before. It seems like a million times before now, and there's only been, this is a few episodes here. There are books written on this subject. Political types are vastly overstating China's ambitions and capabilities. Why? Probably they're doing this so that they can spend more money on their little crappy ships and their F-35s. That is the purpose of the new Red Scare, is to make it where we spend more money on stuff that we don't need. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not even necessarily just talking crap about conservatives here or Republicans here or Project 2025 here. If you want to see a project as successful, quote unquote, as successful as the F-35 project, you got to have yourself some bipartisan support. And guess what? You do have a lot of bipartisan support for all of these horribly wasteful programs that spend a lot of money for very little result in order to combat a threat that is not even really much of a threat. Now, to be fair, like Project 2025 points out, China might be a threat to Taiwan and the Philippines. There's definitely that threat that China poses to Taiwan and to the Philippines, but one thing that you need to note about either of those countries is that neither of them are part of the United States of America. Russia is a threat too, as well as Iran and North Korea, spoiler alert, none of them are really a threat to the United States. Russia the most because it has nukes, but Iran, North Korea, they are not a threat to the United States of America. Transnational terrorism is a threat to the United States as well, although Project 2025 doesn't really take into account the idea of blowback. All right, I get it. There are these threats for whatever reason, and to whomever there are these threats. What are we suggesting? Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the episode really shortly and jump to the possible solutions that Project 2025 has in the next episode. First, I do want to point out one thing. I'm not sure if this is something that's going to be addressed later on, but in priority number 1 of our Project 2025 thing, reestablish a culture of command accountability, non-politicization, and warfighting focus. One of the things that the United States military did that was a positive thing was to integrate service members. It was a time of Jim Crow, of segregation. You might have your black battalion over here and your white battalions over here, but there wasn't a lot of racial integration, racial mixing. If you're going to eat lunch at the mess hall, you're eating with a bunch of white people if you're white, or you're just going to eat with all the black people if you're black. You can't go over to the white people table or to the black people table if you're not the right race. And that's one thing that the U.S. military did. And they did it pretty effectively. And one of the things that produced downstream effects that made it to where the United States as a whole became a less racist and more integrated place. Is that the place? Is that the job of the U.S. military to push that kind of political agenda? Maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was, and it produced actually good effects. So maybe before we decide to be non-political with the military, maybe instead we should think, in what ways can political action in the military be beneficial to the American people? Or maybe we shouldn't think that way. Maybe we should think that the idea that a black guy and a white guy can come together as they attempt to blow the limbs off of somebody else, and that bond of brotherhood will end racism. Maybe that's the wrong way to go about it as well. I'm not sure. I think anybody that says they are sure is either lying to you or lying to themselves. But it is something to think about, something to consider at the very least. So I will be gone for over a week now. This is going to be my last episode for about a week. I'm going to be going on vacation, and I do not intend to think about politics at all while I am drinking a beer on the shore of Lake Superior. I will be back, and whenever I am back, I will dive into the next segment. Apologies for the break, but at the same time, we all need our mental health days. I just so happen to need a mental health week. Until next episode, take it easy.